Welcome to the next installment in my video lecture series for Principles of Macroeconomics. And in this particular video, I'm going to take a look at specialization and trade. And let's take the assumption here. We have two individuals, and I always talk about these two individuals being shipwrecked on the same island. And on the island, there are only two edible resources that are available to the individuals. Individual one is Curly, and the other individual is Mo. And the only two products that they can produce to consume is fish and coconuts. And if we see here, we have the PPFs, the production possibilities frontiers for both individuals. You can see here that Mo can outproduce Curly in coconuts and fish. He's twice as efficient in producing fish. If Mo spends all of his time producing fish, he can produce 30 in a week, while Curly can only produce 15. And if Mo spends all of his time collecting coconuts, he can collect 30, while Curly can only produce 15. So here are their respective production possibilities frontiers, and we want to take a look at, under this scenario of their two different production possibilities frontiers, is specialization and trade possible for these individuals? And we're going to assume that Curly's going to specialize in fish production and Mo in coconut production. All right, so let's say they do that. Curly spends all his time fishing, catches 15 fish. Mo spends all of his time collecting coconuts. He collects 30 during the week. And they get together and they agree that they're going to trade 10 fish for 10 coconuts. So Curly gives Mo 10 fish, so Curly now only has 5, and with no coconuts, because Mo hasn't reciprocated in giving them those. And now Mo has 30 coconuts and 10 fish. And then Mo completes the agreement by giving 10 coconuts to Curly. Well, we can see here that they really haven't accomplished much, because even after they specialized and engaged in trade, the thing that occurs is they're both back on their original production possibilities frontiers. All right, so Curly can eat 5 fish and 10 coconuts, and Mo can eat 10 fish and 20 coconuts. But the thing is, they could have produced that much and consumed that much if they had just produced on their own. So in this scenario here, at that exchange, neither party benefits from specialization and trade. They're both on their original PPF. There would be no reason to specialize and engage in trade when you could have done the same thing, producing in autarky or just producing for yourself. So let's adjust the exchange rate between the two, the terms of trade between these two individuals. Now say they agree to exchange 10 fish for 15 coconuts. So Curly spends all of his time fishing. He catches 15 fish. Mo spends all of his time collecting coconuts. He collects 30. They agree to exchange 10 fish. So now Curly only has 5 fish, and Mo has gained those 10 fish. I'm sorry. So Curly only has 5. He had 15, trades 10. He only has 5 left over. He trades those 10 over to Mo, and then Mo gives Curly 15 coconuts. We can see here that Curly would find this situation acceptable, because he is now consuming past his production possibilities frontier. He would have been incapable of consuming 5 fish and 15 coconuts on his own, so he is made better off by specialization and trade. Unfortunately, Mo is actually made worse off, because now he is inside his production possibilities frontier. He would have been better off just collecting fish and coconuts on his own, because he would have been able to consume more. So under this term of trade, Curly is better off, but Mo is made worse off. Let's again adjust the terms of trade between Curly and Mo, and now they agree to exchange 10 fish for 5 coconuts. So again, Curly catches 15 fish. He gives 10 of them to Mo, so he has 5 left over. Now Mo moves from 30 coconuts and no fish to 30 coconuts and 10 fish, because he received those 10 from Curly. And now Mo gives Curly 5 coconuts in exchange. We can see now that Curly is unhappy with this scenario, because he is inside his production possibilities frontier. He is actually consuming less than he could have if he produced those goods, fish and coconuts, on his own. On the other hand, Mo is finds this scenario acceptable because he is now consuming more than he could have consumed if he produced all these goods on his own. So Mo is consuming outside of his PPF while Carly is consuming inside his PPF. So Carly would not find this scenario acceptable, and neither would Mo. Now, what we talked about previously, and also what your text talks about, is how there are gains that could be made from specialization and trade. And I just gave you a scenario where it seems it's impossible for Carly and Mo to benefit from specialization and trade. So they are no better off. They're either as well off as they were under autarky, or either Curly or Mo is made worse off. So what is the reason for this? And a better way of taking a look at this is, what do you notice is similar between Mo and Curly's PPFs? The thing is, the slopes of these two lines are identical. That means the opportunity costs for both of these parties are identical. So when two parties have identical opportunity costs, there is no benefit from specialization and trade. And also remember that economists refer to the slope of the PPF as the marginal rate of transformation. So what I'm going to do now is I'll give you a couple of PPFs for Mo and Carly where the slope is different, and let's see how this scenario changes. So we can see here I've drawn a different PPF for Mo and Curly, and you can see that they are not parallel to one another. They have different slopes. So we're going to continue with Curly producing the fish and Mo specializing in coconut production. And we're going to assume that Curly and Mo are going to exchange 10 fish for 15 coconuts. So Curly gives 10 fish to Mo, so Curly only has 5 fish left now. And Mo receives those 10 fish, and he gives Curly 15 coconuts in exchange for them. What do we notice here? We notice that Curly is now consuming at a point that's outside of his production possibilities frontier. So Curly is made better off by specialization and trade under this scenario. And also, what do we notice for Mo? Mo's consumption is outside of his PPF. So both parties, both Mo and Curly, are better off by specialization and trade because they are able to consume more than if they had been self-sufficient. Let's adjust this terms of trade here to see how that alters the scenario. Let's say they agree to exchange 10 fish for 20 coconuts. So again, we see that Curly ships 10 fish and gives them to Mo. Now Mo is going to give Curly 20 coconuts. Curly finds this scenario acceptable because why? His consumption falls to the right or outside of his PPF, so now he is consuming more than he could have if he was self-sufficient. The problem here is Mo is not made better off. By exchanging 10 fish for 20 coconuts, he ends up back on his original PPF. Therefore, he is not made better off. There's no incentive for Mo to specialize and engage in trade with Curly if he's just going to end up on his original PPF. He's not consuming more than he could have if he was self-sufficient. So the thing I'm trying to illustrate to you is that even if you have two PPFs that have different slopes, the terms of trade have to be between a specific range for both parties to benefit. Let's change the terms of trade, make it 10 to 10, 10 fish to 10 coconuts. Again, Curly gives Mo 10 fish, so now Curly only has 5 fish. Mo receives those 10 fish and he gives 10 coconuts in exchange. What do we notice here? Curly is not better off. Curly ends up on the same PPF that he would have been on if he was self-sufficient. So there's no reason for Curly to specialize and engage in trade at this term of trade, a 1-to-1 ratio for fish to coconuts. So he would not find this acceptable. Mo would find it acceptable because he is outside of his PPF. He is consuming more than he could have if he had been self-sufficient, so he would have found this acceptable. And remember, when we talk about individuals trading, it's because both parties benefit. There's no benefit to Curly by engaging in specialization and trade and then trading 10 fish for 10 coconuts because he just ends back up on his original PPF. So the thing that is important now is how do you determine who specializes in what? So remember, I had Curly specializing in fishing and Mo specializing in coconut productions. There's a reason why that was selected that way. It has to do with who has the opportunity, the comparative advantage, who can produce an item at the lowest opportunity cost. And let me illustrate that to you. So let's assume and let's compare that if we both had Mo and Curly specializing in coconut production. So in order to gain 10 fish, we've moved up 10 fish for both of these. What's the cost of the 10 fish for both parties? Well, for Curly, Curly loses 10 coconuts, but Mo loses 20 coconuts. So the opportunity cost of producing 10 fish is higher for Mo and less for Curly. So Curly has the comparative advantage in fish production. So if we take a look here, we're just mapping out that information there. So the cost of 10 fish is 20 for Mo. He loses 20 coconuts, but it's only 10 for Curly. Therefore, he has the comparative advantage in fish production. We can do the same thing for coconuts. We can assume that both Mo and Curly are specializing in the same item, fish production, and see how much they lose in fish production when they produce coconuts. So if they both lose 10, if they produce 10 additional coconuts, what do they lose in doing so in terms of fish? Well, we can see that when Mo increases production by 10 coconuts, he only loses 5 fish relative to the 10 fish that Curly loses. So therefore, Mo has a lower opportunity cost in coconut production because he only loses 5 fish when he produces 10 additional coconuts, whereby Curly loses 10 fish when he increases coconut production by 10 units. And this table here just maps out that item. So if we've shown that Curly has the comparative advantage in fish production, therefore that's what he'll specialize, and Mo has the comparative advantage in coconut production, therefore that is what he will specialize in.